So if we're all sitting comfortably, I'll begin. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning. A very warm welcome to the BHP review of the Spring Budget 2024. Welcome to a new venue, the Mowbray. Very nice. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed your coffee and your bacon sandwich. Welcome to a venue, actually, because for the last couple of spring budgets or autumn budgets, we've done them online as a Zoom or a Teams meeting, which for an old person like me is very stressful, not just from a technology point of view, but the idea of talking to a screen on your own for an hour is not quite right. So it's very nice to see you all here, to see lots of new people as well as old friends, to see the whites of your eyes, which is great. Although I didn't appreciate that we're going to actually be that close. So it's probably a bit more stressful than I thought it would be. We are live streaming as well, which at its worst could mean that Just Oil come running in and spray me with orange stuff. But on the at its normal is probably just a hello to mum. Preparing for this year's budget presentation made me quite reflective. I actually specialised in tax back in 91, 92. So I'm sort of 32, 33 years deep into a career in tax advice and tax practice. And the outcome of that is probably 35, 36 budgets on which I've commentated over the period. And the danger with that is it makes you feel a bit jaded and old school. And is it just about the normal, the same old, the budget speech, the press releases, the presentation, the same old. But I think how I felt about this budget, and it's difficult to express it, so I'm going to put it in the Sheffield vernacular, in that I was right excited. So I'll translate that. I was very excited. In that this budget, I think, was delivered at a time where the circumstances and the nuances of that budget make it actually one of the most important budgets we'll have had for quite a while. And I'm going to talk you through that and hopefully give you a flavour of the circumstances around the budget, the measures that were in there, and a feel for where we think this will all end up. The starting point is actually geopolitical, because the world is an extremely challenging place at the moment. We've obviously got the Russia-Ukraine conflict, less prominent in the media at the moment, but still ongoing, with an expectation that actually there will end up being some sort of partitioning of Ukraine many years after the conflict started. The political and economic support from the US is decreasing. The resources of Europe and our EU partners is reducing, and our ability to support that conflict is reducing. The conflict in Israel and Gaza Strip and the fighting with Hamas, ongoing, devastating, but provides significant uncertainty around the Middle East. And as we know, we now have the Houthi attacks on the ships in the Red Sea, which in itself is dangerous and unsettling, but we actually need to reflect on the fact that in terms of global supply chains, 12% of global maritime trade passes through the Red Sea. The impact on supply chains, the cost of supply chains will all be impacted directly as a result of having to sail all the way around rather than through. And we know what the impact was of the Evergreen ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal and how that impacted on supply chain issues and the costs of the goods that were coming across. The biggest thing actually is around the fact that there will be 64 elections around the world in this coming year. Over half of the world's population will be voting in the next year. Some of them, it will have no impact on structure, relationships, etc. But there will be many that will be significant changes in leadership and approach. The biggest of which might actually be the return of Donald Trump. And we know that Super Tuesday at the start of this week saw him move towards the Republican candidate and a Wild West battle with Joe Biden. And in that battle, I can think there's only going to be one winner. And the issue then is that when the US is led by Donald Trump, it becomes very insular, it becomes very protectionist, it looks inwards. It doesn't want to really get involved in things around the world. It has different relationships with Russia, different relationships with North Korea. So it will change the context of everything that we do and the relationships that we have. So geopolitically, it is unstable and challenging. And even within that, I've not mentioned anything about the continuing impact of Brexit, the continuing impact of cost increases, and the supply side issues that we've been faced with over the last couple of years. UK political is similarly challenging. The election must be held by the 28th of January 2025. The polls and public opinion suggest that it's going to be towards the end of 2024. It can't be in November because that's when the US elections are. And we know that the Conservatives are consistently and significantly behind Labour in the polls. So as it stands at the moment, we're told that they're 22 points behind Labour in those polls. That's the worst position since 1997, when there was a change of government and Tony Blair was elected and New Labour was in power. And we know how long that lasted. So the inference is that there will be a change of government at some point, and it will be a significant one, which actually might well stay for quite a long time. However, alongside that, there is a general malaise about Parliament as a whole. And the concern from my perspective is, have the electorate just stopped listening? Are they similarly dischuffed, fed up, disenchanted with both parties, all parties? We've got a political system, a government system that seems to be directed by politically driven people rather than people that deliver things. So I'm talking here about the special advisors, who are all politically motivated, looking for progression within government. They're not there to deliver an economy that works. So the book on there is a Sunday Times bestseller. It's called How Westminster Works. It's actually how Westminster works and why it doesn't at the moment. And it's because of that change in nuance about what Westminster delivers. So the old school approach of ministers being at the top and then actually a core of public servants underneath that delivered effectively and efficiently is a bit of a concern. We've certainly got a more militant population. I was joking about just oil, but I think at all sorts of levels, the population and the electorate are more concerned and more active in expressing their concern than they obviously were. I'm chairman of a Sheffield charity called Sheffield Futures, and I sat in on their young advisors, and they're young adults from 18 to 24, 25. And the way they express themselves and their concern about not being listened to shows that even at the youth level, they're becoming more concerned and militant than they originally were. And then we've got the disruptors around. George Galloway's back in Parliament with a very low vote, but actually the nature of the electorate and the way it was presented meant that he was elected. You've got Nigel Farage, you've got the Reform Party. And the optics around all of this are not helpful. Start of this week was 40 years since the miners' strike, so it's particularly raw for this area, South Yorkshire. You've just had the announcement from Birmingham City Council that having gone bust, it's now going to increase its council tax by 21% with significant public sector deterioration in the things that it can deliver. So the optics around the UK political position are significantly poor, and that's in the light of the geopolitical position, which is similarly challenging. This might make some of you feel your age, but obviously when you used to play the Monopoly game at home at Christmas and you landed on community chest and you used to pull one of these cards out, you used to hold it for a special event, the get out of jail card. And I think that that's where we are now in terms of this government and Jeremy Hunt in particular, in that he's looking to start playing that get out of jail card, looking to become that inspirational lead with innovative measures and strategically leading this party, this government towards an election with a view that they can change the dial for the electorate. The portents on that are not good. As the headline on the BBC News on Tuesday, the 5th of March before the budget was all about we're extending the freezing of fuel duty. Well, it hasn't moved for 11 years. So really, is it something that's going to change an electorate's dial on the way they look at things? We're back to the discussion about fiscal prudence. But actually, we're looking for changes to growth and infrastructure and spending. And actually, we're talking now again about public sector expenditure cuts at a time when actually we're all concerned about what does public sector deliver and how effectively does it deliver it itself. And then I have to say that I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual delivery of the budget speech, but I didn't find it particularly inspiring, a bit bland, a bit same old, same old. Didn't sort of drive me over the trenches thinking I'm going into battle to fight everything that's out there. So, is it really the get out of jail card that we anticipated? And I think the problem is the case of the disappearing cash, which is a mystery worthy of Hercule Poirot. Now, I'm going to refer to it as the David Suchet version, obviously, not the Kenneth Branagh version, the modern one. Although I think I will take a challenge on whether it ought to be Peter Ustinov, because he was always pretty good. But in terms of what we were presented with, we were looking at a government that had fiscal headroom that was heading towards the £30 billion mark. And that in relation to that fiscal headroom, it gave government the flexibility and the funding to go out there and do something that was targeted, strategic, innovative, changes things, and made us feel that actually we would vote for that party. That 30 billion we now think is about 13 billion. And where's the difference gone? And the original evidence, and this is what we talked about back in November when I did the sort of online review of the audit, the autumn budget statement, in that at that point, government had met their inflation target for 2023. It had halved down to 4.6%. The fiscal headroom at that point was 25 billion, with a better than expected tax take, higher prices leading to higher VAT, frozen allowances and stealth tax. And the feeling was that March 24 now would be an opportunity to loosen those purse strings, and that November 23 was okay, but just too early. The verdict, unfortunately, is that we were technically in recession at the end of 2023. Now, I know that's a technical explanation, but it shows that there was a downturn in performance in UK PLC. GDP was estimated to have fallen by 0.3% in October to December 2023, so not good. Forecast now to pick up significantly in 2024, so an expectation that the train is now on the tracks and it's moving more quickly to a better economic position. Inflation was 4% in January 2024. That's the same as it was back in December 2023, and expected to fall below 2% in the next few months. And I struggle to see the maths a little bit on that, because quite a lot of what's announced in this budget actually will have inflationary impetus. So there's some concern over how that will work. Unemployment's still great. Unemployment 3.8%, can't knock it. But actually the number of people who are out of employment is concerning, around about 5 million, particularly when a large proportion of those are young adults. And the next generation are sort of falling fallow. Probably scarred by the pandemic. Where are they going? What are they doing? How do we get them into employment that really matters? Interest rates unchanged at 5.25% for the fourth meeting in a row. They're going to come down. It's just a question of when and at what point in the cycle. The concern I have about the interest rates is really the dour lead by Andrew Bailey, in that it's all supply side, it's all doom and gloom. It's not really that strategic lead that's going to say, well, actually, the Bank of England know what they're doing, and we're going to bring those interest rates down as quickly as we can. Debt is coming down, anticipated to fall to 92.9% of GDP by 28-29, which means the interest burden's falling down. So that's okay. But the tax take will continue not to be as expected due to the reduction in inflation. So there's not going to be as much in the exchequer as we expect. And all of that in the context that we as a group of individuals feel that the tax burden is higher. We have experienced significant stealth tax over the last 4 years because of the freezing of the bans and allowances. This chart shows the tax burden as a proportion of GDP. We anticipate that by 24-25, it's going to be about 37%, which you can see from the fluctuations in the chart takes us right back to 1931. So the tax burden has increased significantly and will continue to do so. And I think that's part and parcel of what we anticipated from this budget. Fiscal headroom has improved, reduce the tax burden, allow us to go out and spend that money, and that should generate growth. And just the headroom's not there as much as it should be. And so what we ended up from Mr. Hunt was a long-term budget for growth, where he explained that we turned the corner on inflation and we now need to turn the corner on growth. So growth is anticipated to move up to 1.8, 1.9% over the next couple of years, then flattens down a little bit, but it's certainly a much improved position from where we are now. His stance is that this was always the plan, but things just haven't happened as quickly as we thought they were. That's the economy. It hasn't recovered in the way or as quickly as we thought it would. And the government has gambled on that. And that's why in November, they said that effectively they weren't going to do anything because they were gambling that the economy would continue to improve. And I think there's an element that they're still gambling on that. And I'll come back to that at the end. So it was a budget for growth with fiscal responsibility. So we're not sort of spending willy-nilly. We believe that lower taxes will mean higher growth, and we'll use the 13 billion headroom, or part of it, half of it, to improve that. Higher growth will mean more jobs, more opportunity, so might well get those that are unemployed back into work, and should mean better public services. And alongside that, the announcement of a public sector productivity program, which I think is focused on making sure that we get a full bang for our buck, and that where public sector expenditure is authorised, that we get the full benefit of it. Because I think, again, at the moment, there's a bit of a perception that it's a black hole that funding disappears into and nothing comes out. And then, fortunately, I'm pleased to say that lots of measures targeted directly on vulnerable households, those that are struggling, those that have got significant debt levels, to support them, and support them at a time when really they're struggling, they're feeling the increased tax burden, and how do we help them? So the big headline was on national insurance. I'm confused about this, though, I have to say, because I spent all of last week firstly trying to set up a government gateway, then remembering what my password was so they can log in. And the whole purpose of logging in was to make sure that I'd paid enough NI to get my state pension. And I have, so it was all right. And yet, the reference in this budget speech was that it's a second tax. And actually, we suffered double taxation on earned income. And that's a step change, really, in how you view NI and how you describe it. And I think the direction of travel is that at some point, and it's been muted many years ago, pay as you earn and NI will become one and the same. And we'll have one tax. And it just goes wholly against the idea that NI was your stamp. And at one point, you did go and get a stamp. And it was all about paying your way into the National Health Service and to paying your way to your pension. So getting over that confusion, we can see what the direction of travel is for government. And what the Chancellor this time was, he extended some reductions in NI that he announced back in November. So Class 1 employees' national insurance contribution will be reduced by a further 2%, from 10% to 8% from 6th of April 2024. Class 4 national insurance contributions for self-employed will be reduced from 8% to 6% from 6th of April 2024, meaning that the total reduction now announced is 9% to 6%. And the consistency is both have reduced by about a third. The expectation is that for an employed individual, on average earnings, is going to be about £900 a year better off. If you're self-employed, it's going to be about £625 better off. All of these changes have to be implemented by the 5th of April. So you've either got unhappy software providers or happy software providers, because they need to have the information from HMRC to change it within the next few weeks. I think the focus on NI is because it's not as expensive as reducing income tax. It doesn't give any relief for pensioners because they don't pay NI. But I think from a pension perspective, government feels that the commitment to the triple lock means that they're okay. I think that's where they sit. It doesn't benefit people who receive solely rental income. So you're still going to be paying the same amount of tax if that's where your income comes from. And I think going back to what we're saying about same old, if you do the same things, you'll end up with the same result. So if the result in November was that the reduction in NI didn't move the electoral dial, then why would it do it now just because you've increased it a little bit more? And that's why I just feel that in some ways I understand it, and it should mean that most of us are a little bit better off, but will it deliver what the Conservative Party really wants? Class 2 national insurance was the stamp, currently £3.45 a week, paid by with your self-assessment. From 6th of April 2024, that's been abolished. So if you've got earnings above 12,570, you'll no longer have to pay it, but will still receive access to contributory benefits. That's the bit I understand about NI. Those with profits between 6,725 and 12,570 will continue to get access without paying, as they currently do, and those with profits below can choose to pay it voluntarily to get access in the way that they currently can anyway. The key thing about the NI announcements is that you need to look at it in the context of also where we are on rates and allowances. So there are no changes to the rates of income tax. There are no changes to the income tax and NI thresholds. They are frozen until April 2028. So most of the debate at the moment is that you need to balance the reduction in your NI liability with the fact that you're paying more income tax because the stealth tax has taken you over. And if you do it as a straight sort of marginal rate of tax, the feeling is that if you are 800, 900 pounds better off annually, then actually because you're that much better off, the stealth tax on that will be about 258 quid. So the net benefit isn't as much as you thought it was, and it changes as you go up. But stealth tax does abound and will continue to abound, and government knows it. And that's how actually they try to fund things. Inheritance tax threshold frozen also until April 2028. No changes to dividends other than the threshold at which you pay dividend tax is reducing to £500 and the CGT exemption is reduced to £3,000. Don't underestimate the impact of all these freezing of thresholds. Unfortunately, being an accountant, you get all your relatives phoning you up saying, can you work out my tax bill? It's a necessary evil. So my uncle rings me up, retired, ex-miner, lives in Wales. He gets state pension. He gets a pension from his employment. And then he's got some dividend income from shares that he's accumulated over the years. He's not a higher rate taxpayer. But as a result of the stealth tax and the freezing of allowances, his liability for next year is about 140 quid, where otherwise he would have had none. So it does hit people, and it does hit people tangibly. And that's just a little old man who's 90 years old, living in a cottage in Wales. Little bit about savings. And the discussion within the budget speech was that we need to support UK investment, UK businesses. And the model has seemed to work in Australia and America, where directly targeted savings product have enabled investment in UK equity, which have been startups, high growth, and have delivered some real bang for their bucks. So a new savings bond is going to be established by the NSI. Details of that to be announced at some point, but the idea is it will be a bond which you can invest in, which will then invest in UK equity, probably targeted investment in UK equity with an expectation that the returns will be higher. Alongside that, the ISA system is to be reformed to encourage investment in the UK, with an additional 5,000 investment to be allowed in qualifying UK equity through a UK equity ISA. This will be in addition to the annual ISA allowance. So again, trying to improve investment funds and sources of funding to startups and UK businesses. The other headline was about the abolition of the non-dom tax rules, stolen entirely from Labour. Don't have a problem with plagiarism or stealing stuff like that. No idea why I included a picture of a beach on there, because actually sitting on a beach has no influence on your domicile status and not usually on your resident status either, unless you're stopping there for more than 185 days. Non-dom status means that a taxpayer only pays tax on their UK income and avoids paying tax on foreign income by opting into the remittance basis, which says that you pay the remittance basis charge each year. And by doing that, you avoid the need to pay tax on the rest of your worldwide income. It's sort of stuck over there. This will be abolished from the 6th of April 2025 with a simpler residence-based regime, with individuals opting in to that regime, not paying UK tax on foreign income and gains for the first 4 years. So you'll be moved into the regime. You'll have a sort of interim period where you'll pay no tax on your foreign income, but then you're fully in and you'll pay UK tax on your worldwide income. There will also be provisions to allow foreign income and gains to be brought back into the UK, which is a good thing, because at the moment that's quite complicated and you suffer tax charges when you bring them in. It's not going to be simple. It's referred to as a simplifying of the rules, because you're getting away from this domicile concept to a residence concept, and there will be transitional rules for those that are already opted in and paying the remittance basic charge. It's a wider process because the intention is that also in moving to that simpler residence basis for income tax, you will move also to it for inheritance tax. So at the moment, if you're non-UK domicile, you only pay inheritance tax on your UK situs assets. So that would be a big change. It politically sensitive, given that our Prime Minister has sort of worked within the non-dom rules. At April 2023, it's estimated that there were 30,000 people claiming the special remittance basis status, and that changing the rules in the way that I've just defined them will raise an additional £2.7 billion per annum to the Exchequer. So it can be a big earner. Furnished holiday lettings. This one felt a bit like a smash and grab, actually. I didn't see it coming. I think it's intended to level the playing field between furnished holiday lets and normal lets, in that a furnished holiday let at the moment gets enhanced tax treatment, in that it gets the capital gains tax reliefs that apply to traders. You get capital allowances, tax relief for items such as furniture, equipment and fixtures, and it's treated as qualifying earnings for pension purposes. So it's going to be abolished from April 2025. It will save the Exchequer 245 million. And the idea is it will just level up the playing field between those that are having enhanced treatment and those that aren't. The high income child benefit charge. I think we knew this one was coming because I think the Chancellor had been on a number of the sort of Sunday political interview programs, Laura Koonsberg and people like that, and talked about his intention to deal with this. So obviously where you've got children claim child benefit. However, where your income is at a certain level, you either give up that child benefit or you suffer the high income child benefit charge. The high income child benefit charge currently applies where an individual or their partner has adjusted net income of £50,000 and then fully tapers away the child benefit once adjusted net income exceeds £60,000. The inequity on it is that if you've got one individual in that partnership that earns more than £50,000, then you will start to lose your child benefit. However, if you were to have two individuals that both earn £49,000, then you'd retain all of it. And it just seems wholly unfair. So the idea is that the high income child benefit charge will be assessed on a household income basis rather than an individual. And whilst they get to that, the adjusted net income threshold will be increased to 60,000, and the tapering away will happen at a lower incline. And so you will only lose child benefit income of £80,000. That change will benefit 485,000 families. So it's pretty wide ranging, with 170,000 individuals being removed wholly from the charge, which can cost you about £1,600 a year. So I quite like that. Right, property seems to be quite a focus for government. Talked about furnished holiday lets, removing the inefficiencies in there and making sure everybody is level. This one, I sort of get my head around in that he effectively has reduced the capital gains tax rate on the sale of a second property. What hasn't happened in this budget is there are no measures to address the inequity between income tax rates and capital gains tax rates. So income tax rates, 40%, 45%, capital gains tax rate, 10%, 20%, or 28% on a residential property. What the Chancellor said in his speech is that he acknowledges that if CGT rates are too high, then nobody sells. And when nobody sells, you don't get any tax. Yeah, I get that logic. Sort of got there a few years ago, actually. And so what he's saying is that the rate of CGT on residential property is too high at 28%. And so the announcement is that from 6th of April 2024, the higher rate of CGT on residential property will reduce from 28% to 24%. So a 4% reduction. The logic is that at 24%, people will sell. And so there's an influx of properties released to the market, which sort of helps the housing stock. The tax burden on that is not as bad as it could be, so people will take the chance and deal with it. There's sort of a slightly cynical approach to this, which is it takes the stance that only rich people have got second properties that they can sell, because the reduction in rate only applies to higher rate taxpayers. So if you're a higher rate taxpayer, then your tax bill on a sale of a second property will fall from 28% to 24%. If you are a lower rate taxpayer, it will remain at 18%. So there isn't any sort of consistency about the reductions in the band. But it is expected to incentivize early disposal of second homes, buy-to-let properties, and other residential properties where the gain isn't covered by principal private residence relief. A couple of things on corporation tax. One is no change to the rates. They are as anticipated. So the main headline rate of corporation tax is still 25%. The only real discussion within corporation tax was about the tax relief available for qualifying capital expenditure, which we know that the announcement of full expensing, which is you get 100% relief for capital expenditure, was originally temporary, has now been made permanent. And it's in addition to the annual investment allowance, which allows you to get tax relief of up to £1 million on qualifying expenditure. And it's available on new and unused plant and machinery. 100% if it's new plant and machinery, 50% if it's anything that's in the special rate pool. The extension is welcomed. I get really wound up about the movement in tax law over capital allowances. You know, have some real robustness about your decision making and stick with it at 100% relief. And the discussion is that it will now be extended to plant and machinery that's held for leasing, but only following consultation and when the public finance is allowed. So that will mean an extension of full expensing. Will it deliver? I'm not convinced. The stance from every chancellor over the last 4 or 5 budgets, they have said that 99% of businesses already get 100% relief for their capital expenditure. So this change is not going to move anything. It's only available to companies, but businesses still get the AIA, so they should still be all right. It's a bit of a pain in the neck keeping track of things on which you've kept full expensing, because if you sell it, you've then got to have a balancing allowance or balancing charge. It will probably, I think, only benefit your larger corporates. So 99% of businesses covers just about everybody that's here. 1% is your ICIs, your BPs. So I think at that level, it will enhance their capital allowances claims. And it's on the back of that that government last time said that it was £11 billion tax giveaway. And it was described as the biggest tax giveaway in modern time. It's no giveaway. It's just an acceleration of capital allowances, and it's an acceleration of capital allowances for larger entities, not for your common or garden SME. You'll be all right anyway. Right, back to property, actually. Stamp duty, land tax. Liz Truss extended some SDLT reductions to the end of March 2025. And in effect, they said that the stamp duty exemption to residential property is increased to £250,000 up until that date. And if you're a first-time buyer, it's increased to £425,000 up until that date. That relief will end at that date. Now, I say that in the context of a government that's struggling. I say that in the context of a government that might not well be there. So that might well change. But there is a cliff edge, a sunset on that those rules. The big thing in relation to stamp duty was about multiple dwellings relief, which is going to be abolished from the 1st of June 2024. I think we certainly expected it would happen. How quickly it would happen, we didn't know. It could have been one of those midnight on budget day changes, but actually it's from the 1st of June 2024. A multiple dwellings relief really allows a purchaser to calculate the stamp duty where they're buying more than 2 properties on the average value of the dwellings purchased rather than the aggregate value. So, for example, 5 dwellings costing £1 million will now cost 71,250 in SDLT compared to a cost of 30,000 based on an average value of 200,000. Million divided by 5, work out the stamp duty, gives you 30,000. £1 million at current stamp duty rates gets you 71,250. The original intention of multiple dwellings relief was that it was going to support investment in the private rental sector. What government now says is there is no evidence it had any of that impact whatsoever. So why leave it in there? And so that's why they've abolished it. If you complete a property transaction before 1st of June 2024, you'll still get it. If you've exchanged on contracts but don't complete until after 1st of June 2024, you'll still get it. VAT. I don't think I've had a VAT slide for 3 years. It's just not been on government agenda. And I'm surprised by that, because I'd always anticipate that Brexit would actually see us sever the ties with the EU harmonisation and the restrictions around that, and allow us, UK PLC, to use VAT more as a mechanism to direct spending, to raise additional VAT where government felt that they were the sort of goods that could stand it, so luxury goods, and to really support areas of the economy, whether it's charities or particular goods where the VAT rate should be lower. We talked about REULA 2023 last time, which is about the retention of part of EU law and how we deal with that. But the big thing this time was that the VAT registration threshold finally increased to 90,000 from £85,000. That's the first increase in 7 years. The deregistration threshold increased to £88,000, the first movement in 7 years. It's still a cliff edge, though. If you have turnover of more than 90,000, you have to register for VAT and suffer that 20% cost. And then I'm not convinced that a £5,000 increase really accounts for inflation or the impact of inflation over the last 7 years. So from 85,000 up to 90,000 is good, but actually there will still be businesses that are in the VAT program because of stealth movement and inflation. Right. And miscellaneous stuff. Lots of good things about creative, visual, films, everything around that, and significant tax reliefs that have been there for a while and are now either retained or increased. So the tax relief for visual effects, the tax credit's been increased by 5%, and a cap that applied to that expenditure has been removed. There's a new tax credit of 53% for UK independent films, and the Chancellor made reference to films that were currently in production that would benefit from this. There's 26 million funding for the National Theatre, and then the relief for orchestras, museums, theatres was made permanent rather than temporary, at 45% for touring and 40% for non-touring productions. This is the bit of a budget that I get a bit jaded about, because if you listen to the budget speech, you get number blindness, because there's 240 million here, there's 500 million here, there's 700 million here. And the ability to pull all of that together into a concerted plan is something I really struggle with, and the understanding of where that money goes. And that's the bit I think that we've not got people coming with us, because it doesn't feel to me that the world is a better place today because of that amount of money. I'm not convinced that an announcement by a Chancellor today that he's going to spend 500 million on a particular entity or place is going to directly improve the position in that entity or place. And that's the bit that I struggle with. What's the evidential trail that will make sure that we get full bang for our full buck? And the budget itself yesterday was a pretty feisty affair, actually. Lots of taunting, lots of banter, pretty annoying stuff most of the time. The budget speech itself lasted just over an hour. It wasn't because there was anything else in there or any depth, which why I said it was not a particularly impressive budget speech, but it was more about the political frustrations and banter that's in there. And why some MP would stand next to the speaker shouting things 5 times so that you can't hear anything else. It really does sort of frustrate me about how Parliament works. And some of the feistiness came in the response to the budget by Keir Starmer, but when he referred to Sunak and Hunt as the Chucker brothers of decline, you know, pretty derogatory stuff. And a lot of Parliament does operate in a sort of pantomime way. So you can see the analogy there. But it did lead me to this particular technical point, which is this is one of these double cab pickups. They're very nice cars, and you sit in the cab of a double cab pickup, and you think you're probably in a limousine. I mean, they've got everything, all singing, all dancing, all everything that goes with it. Government announced that they were going to change the tax treatment of that from being a van to being a car. And the implications for an individual that had got one of those would be a massive increase in their benefit in kind and tax charge. 2 weeks later, it was reversed, and it's still a van. And the reason it was reversed was because of adverse comment from farmers and construction workers. And it seems to me that there's an element of Parliament now that works on the basis that we'll throw it out there, see what the reaction is. If it's positive and it moves the dial, it's a yes. If it doesn't, then it's a no. And that doesn't really seem to me to be the right way to manage a progressive economy. Marathon Man is the name of a 1976 thriller starring Dustin Hoffman. We have our very own Marathon Man, which is Jeremy Hunt. And the feistiness of the budget speech and the banter and everything around it sort of went to a new edge when he actually said that Keir Starmer ought to lose a few pounds by joining him on his marathon training, which is a bit disingenuous, but I think is something that will never come to fruition, because our very own Marathon Man is probably going to hit the wall around about October time. So it's all right putting out there that it's a long-term budget for growth, but long-term, I think, needs to be longer than October 2024, because I think that's when the election will take place. And Mr. Hunt will no longer be directing that long-term budget. Which brings me to the final view of what this budget reminds me of. And it does take me back a bit to the fantastic Scottish rugby commentator, Bill McLaren, who describes very eloquently every Six Nations match. And you know, he had his own style and manner of doing things, and used to say some pretty strange things. So he did say that Doddy Weir was as much use as a lighthouse in the desert. And he did refer to Bill Beaumont as looking like a man who enjoys his food. But the enjoyment of listening to Bill McLaren was always at the end of the match when he referred to the up and under, or the Gary Owen as it was, which was the sort of Hail Mary kick high and deep into the opposition's half, with the expectation that everybody sort of piled in and saw what came out the other side, and anything might happen. And I think that this budget was the first attempt at that up and under, and the first attempt by government to throw something in there and see what happens, and see what comes out the other side, and see if we can change the sort of political dial. And Bill McLaren used to refer to it as the Gary Owen. And his best statement ever was that somebody from Gary Owen actually did a Gary Owen. So it was a Gary Owen from the man from Gary Owen. So it went round in circles. But what it then led me to about this is actually, this might not be the up and under. Because I think, based on what I know on this budget, that government thinks that the economy is going to improve. It's going to improve significantly in the next 3 months, and that we could well be here again in May or June. So it's not the last gasp up and under, it's the first attempt. If it fails, I think they'll try again. And I think we'll end up in October with an election. And the question will be, has the autumn statement, followed by the spring statement, followed by the emergency June up and under, change the electoral dial such that the Tory government stays in place? And I ain't convinced at the moment. Okay, burbled on for long enough. Any questions? William? VAT, value-added tax. No, that.
Yeah, the increase in the threshold to £9.
Yes.
Registration. That perceptibly, conceivably, could be deflationary.
Correct.
Were there any other measures in the budget that you would think were deflationary or neutral?
It's a great question. I think what the Chancellor said was that he believes that the reduction in NI is deflationary in its wider sense. I'm not convinced about that. I didn't see anything particularly else in there, but obviously what he did say was he anticipates that inflation will be below 2% within a few months. So what we know, what's going to change that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm inclined to agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't see him coming down to that level
No.
quickly. And that gives a problem to the Bank of England, because you said that
One
the
follows
supply
one.
side issues, from Andrew's, the guy in charge of Bank of England. Forgive his surname now, but yeah,
Andrew Bailey.
Andrew, that's it.
Yeah, well, and that's a great indication of why that strategic lead from the Bank of England isn't strong enough. And then I think you're right. Inflation needs to come down in order for interest rates to come down. What worries me still is that interest rates have been viewed as a means of dampening demand. And actually, most of the issues we've been facing have been supply side issues. And there's a mismatch between the two. Correct. Yeah. No, I agree. Thank you, William. One there, sorry. Jonathan, just wait for the mic to come across and then.
Hi, Chris. I think one of the things that we saw, was it a couple of years ago, national insurance going up to help fund long-term care, social services. It seems we've had a roundabout turn, which could be read as we don't really care about them anymore. Did I see something about national insurance actually leading to be eradicated? Is that the word he used, or?
Well, eradicate is a very strong word. I think, as I said in my presentation, I think there's an alignment of pay as you earn and national insurance, so they're viewed as one and the same. The discussion in this speech was about making sure that workers keep more of their earnings, rather than a decision about it more or less into the NHS or long-term care. So it seems to me that everything's reducing back into one pot, and then it's how you tell it. I'd be really disappointed if the idea that NI funded care and the NHS, it was gone forever, because it's what we were brought up on. Yeah. No, I get that. It's like a searchlight. Good stuff. All right. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you've been entertained. It is great to see you all, and thank you for supporting this event. There are some feedback forms in your pack. First year for 10 years, I've remembered that I need to say that, which is good. Other than that, feel free to stay around for a further coffee or a chat with your BHP contacts, and we hope to see you again soon. So thank you very much.